Macroeconomics is the study of the big parts of the economy. Macro means large, it's the nationwide impact of government. The government is much more concerned with macroeconomics, the big picture, rather than microeconomics, which is you and your personal finances. The government's decision greatly impacts their nation's economy. Even a decision to not do anything has a huge impact on the economy. Adam Smith, remember the guy who wrote The Wealth of Nations, says that when individuals make the right decisions for themselves, they benefit the nation. If every individual is doing well, well, then the group is doing well. So, how do we make the group do well? Let each individual make the decisions that's best for themselves. That works to some extent. As each individual gets wealthy and better off, well, so does the nation. The opposite of that idea is called the tragedy of the commons. This is an old economic idea. Back in the day, there would be pasture land that was collectively owned by the town. It would be common pasture land. And this guy wrote that when there's common pasture land, people often make very selfish choices that benefits them. And then that selfish choice hurts the common good, like the pasture land. Everyone wants as many sheep as possible. Well, that overgrazes the area. So it might actually benefit to not share this resource and to force people to do things that are not in their own best interest, but really does help them in the long run. So if we split up this pasture land and give it to individuals, they might not have as many sheep as before, but everyone is doing better off. A modern example of this is the fisheries of the world. No one owns the fish in the open ocean. And if no one owns them, every nation says, well, I need to get as many fish as possible to benefit my nation. Well, when you do that, you vastly overfish, and then all of a sudden there's not enough fish for everyone. And we have overfished for decades and decades. Even more than that, one of the biggest resources in the New World were the cod fisheries off the Grand Banks, off of southern Canada. These fisheries were so useful because most of the fish off the coast of Europe had been depleted by vastly overfishing. What's good for you might hurt the entire nation. Just because it's good for one group does not mean that it's good for the whole. So we have to take both of these ideas into account. Thomas Jefferson is often quoted by saying that government is best which governs least. And if you leave the quote there, it seems like Thomas Jefferson doesn't like much of the government, but that is not the entire quote. He finishes by saying, because its people discipline themselves. We can only have an effective government that does nothing effectively if the people already make good decisions. This overgrazing of the pasture land, are those sheep owners effectively disciplining themselves? No. Do those fishing corporations effectively discipline themselves? No, they make bad decisions that hurts everybody. So sometimes the government does have to step in and say, you are not disciplining yourself, so we have to make you do what's good for everyone. And what's good for everyone is actually going to be good for the fishermen themselves in the long run. Because if we run out of fish or greatly reduce our stock, then there's no more, and the fishing company is hurt as much as anyone else. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, right after he talks about the Lord's Supper, it's a time to consider yourself and look into your own life and see how pleasing you are to the Lord. And he says something like, if you judged yourself, then you wouldn't need other people to judge you. And that is exactly what Thomas Jefferson is saying. If the individual citizen is not only making selfish decisions, but they're making decisions that are good for themselves and everyone else, they're making wise decisions, then the government doesn't need to step in. Unfortunately, we don't always make wise decisions, and we often do make selfish decisions that hurts other people, and so the government does have to step in. Government taxation and government spending are huge money movers. There are not many corporations in the US that spend as much money as the US government. I don't know if any of them do. Tons of money gets moved around because the government is taking it or spending it. Government spending is one of the, if not the largest influence on how much inflation there is. And remember, inflation and deflation can be very helpful or hurtful to the economy, so you need to keep an eye on that. Foreign policy that the government makes has a huge impact on the economy. Just think, we import so much from China. a small percent increase on tariffs from China would greatly impact what people bought and what was available for buying and selling. The government has a huge impact on the economy in that way. Our government is much more involved in the economy than it used to be in Thomas Jefferson's day. However, it is still much hands off compared to other nations in the world. There are few nations with a government that's as deregulated as ours. I know that in modern days, a lot of people have been complaining about government overregulation. But if you compare ourselves to even our next door neighbor, Canada, we have a lot fewer regulations than they do, even though we have much more than we used to. Well, unfortunately, the government does not always help the economy. Prudent and wise policies encourage economic growth, and foolish policies stifle growth. I think that's really obvious. What are some of the hurtful things that government can do? Well, the first one is excessive taxation. Every government in the history of the world has taxed its people. There have been different types of taxes: sales tax, income tax, just a poll tax, meaning a tax on every individual person. Tons of different types of taxes. Some of them have had really light taxes, some of them very heavy taxes. Well, the more you tax people, the worse the economy is going to get. Businesses and people cannot reinvest their money in capital goods if they give it all to the government. Remember, capital goods are producer goods. If you can't spend your money on making more producer goods, more factories and machines, then you won't grow in the future. Either your production decreases or it doesn't increase as much as it should. And if you're not making as much as you should, your prices need to go up. If your prices go up, then there will be people who need or want your product who don't get it. If there's a problem, then the government often decides they need to fix things. How they fix things? With some kind of bailout or handout. All these prices are too high. Let's give money to the people to help out with that. And as government starts handing out more money, what do they have to do? They have to raise taxes to pay for the handouts. And then we go right back to the beginning. The government just raised taxes, so the businesses can't reinvest in capital goods. So the businesses are hurting, prices go up, people get laid off, people don't get what they want, there's a crisis, the government has to bail you out, and then the government has to raise taxes to pay for that bailout again, and round and round and round the cycle goes. Our government just spent $2 trillion bailing out the economy for the COVID-19 crisis. The House voted yes for $3 trillion more, but Trump said he'd veto that. I guess we'll wait and see what happens. The government is also talking about cutting taxes at the same time. I think this is absolutely ridiculous to say we're going to spend $2 trillion and we're going to take in less money. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You cannot spend money without making money. You have to decide, do I want to raise taxes and spend it, or do I want to lower taxes and not spend it? You can't decide to lower taxes and raise spending. That just doesn't work. You're just going to go into debt and let your kids pay it off, and grandkids and great-grandkids. The next harmful thing that a government can do is cause massive inflation or debasement of money. Remember the Romans who mixed in other metals in their silver coins until there was hardly any silver. Modern nations do the same thing, although we usually don't use gold and silver coins, but we still cause massive inflation. When the government makes too much money, each dollar is worth less than it used to. And when you say, I want to cut taxes and spend money, what you're really saying is, I just want to add more money into the economy. Well, you could do that. You just make the value of money worth less and less and less and less. This happened many times around the world. It happened in Venezuela recently. It happened in Zimbabwe a couple years ago. It happened in Germany just before World War II. There's lots of examples of this. And what happens is the prices go way up. And all of a sudden you're printing off $100 trillion bills. It's crazy. Prices rise rapidly. Investment just stops because people have no confidence in the economy. Why should I build a new factory if the economy is so bad no one has any money to buy the things I produce? So no one builds anything new, no one invests in any new business. If our economy was as bad as Zimbabwe's, would you want to start your own mom and pop coffee shop? I don't think so. Your savings are absolutely wiped out. Imagine if you were in Zimbabwe and you had $1 million in the bank account. You're like, yay, I'm rich. And then all of a sudden, the price of a can of Coke is $20 trillion. All of a sudden, what took you decades to save up what used to make you rich, now you have no money at all. Absolutely nothing in the bank. That $1 million is now worth, what $1 was worth back in the day. That's awful. And it's not just personal savings are wiped out. You go, oh, well, there goes my retirement. That's happening to businesses. What happens if your business loses all its savings? Well, then it has to fire all its people. It goes bankrupt. And then all those people are out of a job. And, well, the economy is now in the toilet. Would you lend money if inflation is going crazy? No, because you're not going to get the same value back, even if you get the same dollar bill amount back. So interest rates go sky high, and small loans and large loans, business loans, are the backbone of any modern economy. If you can't get a loan at the bank, good luck doing anything. Just giving everyone free money does not work. It might help in the short run. It might help you pay off a couple bills today, but it destroys the economy in the long run. When the government spends too much money, well, that goes hand in hand with heavy taxation. Just spending too much money is very, very harmful. Wars can be very expensive. Here's a list of American wars through the years, and it says on the bottom right, all the dollar amounts are adjusted for inflation to $2011. The American Revolution cost $2.5 billion. The War of 1812 cost $1.5 billion. So the Union spent almost $60 billion on the Civil War. The Confederates only spent a third of that, $20 billion. So any wonder that the Union won if they're outspending the other side 3-1. See here, World War I, $334 billion. World War II, $4 trillion. That's a lot of money. Vietnam, 700 billion, sorry, 0.7 trillion. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Even if these wars are completely justified, should we stop Hitler? Absolutely, we should stop Hitler. It still costs an arm and a leg. And America has been at war for decades at this point. We're in a state of almost constant war. And even if every action is 100% justified, it still costs money. Many governments spend taxpayer dollars on these massive monuments to themselves, like these pyramids. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of villagers were tasked to build the pyramids, but I do know that they were not slaves. They were paid, and they worked for decades on each one of these pyramids. They would come in the flood season when all their fields are flooded and they can't work there. They come in and they work. That costs who knows how many hundreds of billions of dollars. Probably not the wisest use of the government's money, but there you go. Modern day governments spend a lot of money on bureaucracies. This is what Washington, D.C. looks like. A lot of the government just looks like people sitting in desks doing paperwork. That's the modern day government. Think of the IRS, people looking at your tax records all day long. Think about the DMV, people making up driver's licenses and handing out tests and things like that all day long. Each one of those people is getting a salary, and government jobs are usually fairly well paid. That can be a lot of money. A while ago, there was a big investigation on government waste, and people were outraged that there was some kind of government conference, and they had bought hundreds of muffins for all these senators and whatnot, and they were charged $6 a muffin. People were like, "Well, but those better be the best muffins in the world if you're charging $6 a muffin." See, these catering companies know, it's the government. They're not spending their own money. They'll sign any check we give them. So they're billing them ridiculous amounts for food. And the senators are like, yeah, sure, take as much money as you want for the food and hotel. And the people are like, why are you wasting my money? Every dollar spent by the government is a dollar taken out of the economy. It's put back into the economy, but it's taken out of the economy to put back in it. I think this comic really well illustrates how the government merely mixes up the cash and pushes it from one side to another side, goes, yay, we're helping. Well, you're only helping if you spend the money more wisely than the businesses would have by themselves. The problem with that is if a business makes a foolish decision, they go out of business and the remainder of the businesses are better off. And if they do wisely, then they get to keep all their money. What happens when the government foolishly spends their money? Are they going to go bankrupt or go out of business? Nope. So there is really no possibility of failure for the government. They have no reason to spend their money wisely. It's kind of sad. But when a politician says, "Hey, I lobbied to get money for you, for the people who are hurt by COVID," well, where are they getting money from? They're getting money from you to give to you, which might be somewhat helpful, but not nearly as helpful as they. Next harmful policy is excessive regulation and telling the economy what to do. Yes, some regulations are incredibly helpful. I am glad that there are health inspectors that look at the restaurants and make sure that there aren't flies everywhere. That's a good regulation. But there can be crazy regulations that are very, very harmful. And remember, for each regulation, you have to hire an inspector to make sure that it happens. That's one more salary that the people are paying for. Usually, regulations are very well-meaning. They're trying to help people. That doesn't mean they're actually helping people, just that they're trying to help people. Sometimes they have no clue what they're doing because they've never worked in that industry. I've seen some of the directions for Vermont schools, how they're going to reopen, and they're saying things like every student must wear a face mask all day long. And that is for preschoolers. That's for 3-year-olds. That's for 6-year-olds. A 3-year-old will not wear a face mask all day long. That's just not going to happen. And you have a bunch of politicians saying, "Oh, yeah, that sounds great. Stop the spread of disease by making 3-year-olds wear masks." And every teacher in the state's going, "Wait, what?" That's just not practical. So they're often well-meaning, just maybe not always making good decisions. Usually, every regulation is incredibly expensive. If they tell a business that they need to buy the safety equipment, okay, that's expensive. If they tell you that you need to buy this particular scrubber for the pollution coming out of your smokestack, okay, that's going to be expensive. Then changing the regulations, even changing it for the better, can be difficult. I heard on the news, I forget what it was, but Trump said that he wanted to deregulate something and allow a little more pollution in a factory. And all these factories are against it because they said, "We just bought these really expensive scrubbers, and now you're saying we don't need them. Or you're saying that our competition doesn't need to buy them. Well, we just bought them. How come they don't have to buy them?" So excessive regulation can be very difficult. And then you have to pay the salaries of all the inspectors who are looking into all that thing, and that's expensive. And then a lot of people say, "Well, that's just the price of safety." Well, sure, to some extent. Yes, I want to live in a safe place. I want my air that I breathe to be clean. I want the water that I drink to be clean. So we need some sort of regulations. We need to make sure no one's dumping toxic waste in our rivers that we're drinking out of. But you can absolutely go too far. There's always some element of risk. And you could spend billions and billions of dollars to reduce that risk to almost nothing. But at some point, you got to say, do we have the cash for this? Corruption is by far the worst policy that a nation can have. The corruption is when the government steals taxpayer money for their own purposes. They're not using your money to help you, they're using your money to help themselves. Some governments literally just go to the bank and steal money. Zimbabwe was an example of this. I read a story years ago about the president of Zimbabwe told one of his generals, "Go to the bank and withdraw $1 million for myself." So the general goes to one of his colonels or majors or something and says, "Go to the bank and take $2 million out for the president and me." He goes, "Okay." And then he goes to one of his servants and says, "Go get $5 million." So it ends up, it gets pushed down the chain of command till someone goes into the bank and says, "Give me $10 million. The president says so." So it's a bank robbery by the president, basically at gunpoint. And then that guy keeps $1 million, gives it to his superior. He keeps $1 or $2 million, gives it to his superior. And it goes on until the government had stolen about $10 million. $1 million of it goes to the president, and the rest of it's going to all these different servants. That happens all the time in different nations, especially ones that are not democratic. It does happen in America, but we usually find out about it and send that guy to jail. Thankfully, we have government watchdogs. We have auditors that watch the money trail and look at where the money is going. And if there's hanky-panky going on, they they get the guy arrested, hopefully. But there's many governments that rely on bribes. I knew a missionary friend who went down to a South American country, and he was visiting a guy who had been there for a while, and their car gets pulled over by a cop, and the cop is kind of hemming and hawing why he pulled him over, wouldn't really say. And the missionary says, "Oh, I know what's happening. He wants a bribe. You see, the cops are paid almost nothing. They can't live off of their official salary, so they have to have bribes just to feed their family." And he wants to support the cops, so every time he gets pulled over, he is basically giving charity to the police officers as a form of a bribe. They rely on bribes to feed their family. That's not how the government's supposed to be run. Sometimes the government officials can award contracts or other favors really unfairly. So the government buys a lot of stuff and they award contracts to different people. I think the Air Force buys planes from Boeing. You know, you buy tanks from these big factories. How about recently building a wall in the Mexican border? Who's going to build the wall? Not Trump himself. He's going to hire some kind of construction company to build that wall. Well, what if you have a best friend who owns a construction company and the government needs something constructed and you're going to hire him, even though you know he's going to charge you more and do a poor job compared to this other guy? You're supposed to pick the company that will do the best quality job for the least price. Or you could just pick your brother or cousin or friend. That's corruption. Of course, you could be bribed. Bribing is when you give a politician money or a favor, a gold watch, season tickets, something like that. A kickback is when a politician gives a company a government contract and then that company gives them money back. So you say, you know, I will hire you to build this new bridge for $20 million. They say, great, here's $500,000 out of that. So you are getting taxpayer money given to the politician. Hiring buddies and friends to do things. Many nations use cops and soldiers to intimidate and bully people and businesses to do what they want. And that is not right. You do not want to live in a country that is ruled by force. Many of these nations pretend that they are democratic, and they are mostly democratic, but every once in a while, you know, there's cops waving their guns around saying the government says to do this. This type of corruption and threatening and intimidation scares businesses. If you're afraid that the government is going to steal all your cash or beat you up if you don't do what they say, you might not start a new business. You might not grow. You just want to keep your nose down, out of trouble, and don't get the attention of the government. So productivity will be super low. I will say this kind of government is very effective. If you're a politician, you can make millions while the rest of your nation is in poverty.